He hadn't cooked a meal for 2 adults in 7 years. But there he was, on a Thursday evening, standing in front of his open fridge with the look of a man who had forgotten what people ate when they were trying to impress someone. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, he reminded himself. It was just dinner, a restaurant, a woman named Claire. The fact that his 8-year-old son had spent the last 4 days acting like he was personally responsible for the future of the family. Will had found out the way Will always found out things. Not by being told, by listening. Patrick hadn't been careful enough on the phone. He'd taken the call from his coworker, Jess, while Will was supposedly building something complicated with his Lego on the living room floor, the kind of focused quiet that usually meant the boy was entirely elsewhere. But Will had a particular talent for appearing absorbed while being completely, silently attentive. By the time Patrick hung up, his son was standing in the kitchen doorway with a piece of Manhattan toast in his hand and an expression that could only be described as satisfaction. "You have a date," Will said. "Dassus, it's not a date." Will took a bite of the toast. "Okay," he said, in the tone that meant he had already decided it was a date and was simply being polite about it. That had been Sunday. By Wednesday, Will had opinions. Dasser, he appeared in the bathroom doorway while Patrick was shaving, studied him for a moment, and offered the following assessment without being asked. The gray shirt made him look like he was going to a meeting. The dark green one was better, and he should probably do something about the fact that his jacket had a small paint stain on the left cuff that he may not have noticed, but other people definitely would. He set it down. Patrick noticed the paint stain. He had not noticed it before. He had been wearing that jacket for the better part of the winter. He put on the dark green shirt. Will followed him to the front hallway. That evening, both hands in the pockets of his sweatshirt, watching, with the quiet attention he gave to things he considered important. Patrick was putting on his shoes when he felt something dropped into the side pocket of his jacket. He turned around. Will was already backing toward the stairs, expression carefully neutral. "Jester, what did you just put in there?" Saying nothing. He set it down, Will. "It's for later," his son said, one hand on the banister. "You'll know when." Then, as if this required clarification, he added, "Don't look at it in the car. Wait until you're actually there." Patrick reached for his pocket. Will's eyes went wide. He set it down, Dad. Then to check, Patrick left the pocket alone. His neighbor Frank, a retired electrician, who lived 2 doors down and had been dropping by to check on them both since Will was a toddler, arrived with 15 minutes to spare. He brought a magazine he'd already read and settled into the armchair and zintoed by the window, like a man with no intention of going anywhere soon. Frank didn't say anything about where Patrick was going. He just looked at the green shirt, gave a small nod, and went back to his magazine. Patrick stood at the door. Will was at the top of the stairs, sitting with his arms resting on his knees, watching. "You're going to be late," his son said. "I know." "Go then." "Sir." Patrick went. He sat in his truck for 9 minutes in the parking lot of the restaurant before he could make himself get out. He knew that was too long. He also knew he was going to do it anyway, because knowing the right thing and being capable of the right thing were not always Not always the same skill. And he had never been as good at the second one as he wanted to be. The restaurant was on a quieter street in the west end of the city, the kind of place that had been there for 20 years and knew it didn't need to try very hard. Good lighting, wooden tables. The sort of menu that changed with the season. Patrick had driven past it 100 times without ever going in. They set it down. He arrived 4 minutes early and stood at the entrance, and felt like an entirely different person than the one who had driven here. He hadn't done this in 7 years. That had done this in 7 years. That wasn't the part that surprised him. The part that surprised him was that it still felt like the first time. Like none of those 7 years had taught him anything useful about standing in front of a door and not knowing what was on the other side. He was watching a streetcar pass at the end of the block when he heard someone approaching behind him. Quick steps, purposeful, slightly uneven, on the uneven sidewalk. He turned. She was moving the way people move when they've given themselves exactly enough time and then run slightly over. Her coat was dark, unbuttoned despite the cold, a scarf looped once around her neck, dark hair, earrings that caught the light. At the restaurant, she was looking at the door of the restaurant with the expression of someone checking that they have the right address. And when her eyes shifted to him, something in her face recalibrated slightly. Not relief, exactly. Recognition.
There's some sign, Bong, set it down.
The look of arriving somewhere you were supposed to be. They son. Patrick held the door. He stepped in, and the warmth of the restaurant came up around them both. And he was about to say something. His name, or hello, or some other perfectly reasonable beginning. When she turned slightly toward him, and instead of speaking, she glanced down at his jacket pocket. There was something there he'd forgotten. The edge of whatever Will had put in there was just visible. White paper, the corner of it bent from the ride over with something written on it. In the unmistakable handwriting child. Pressing down, hard with a marker, because the color needed to stay.
That it.
She looked at it. Then she looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like the feeling of recognizing a language you hadn't heard in a while, but hadn't forgotten. That's from your kid, isn't it? She said. It wasn't quite a question. Patrick's hand was still on the door. He became aware of the door because of the effort it was taking to keep holding it. He was also aware that his chest was doing something inconvenient, that he was going to need a moment to address. How did you know? He said. He smiled. Small. A little careful. My nephew's 8, she said. They press differently than adults, like they're trying to make the paper remember. The door swung shut behind them. They were seated at a corner table. With enough space between them and the next party that the conversation felt private without being effortful. Patrick was grateful for this in a way he couldn't have articulated if asked. He had not, he realized, been in a room with someone who was looking at him like that in a very long time. Not with pity, not with the careful, slightly tilted expression that people used when they wanted to acknowledge something difficult without making it too difficult. Just level. Present, like he was simply a person at a table and she was simply another person across from it. And neither of them needed to account for the time between now and whatever had come before. Set it down. Her name was Claire. She worked in urban planning for the city. She had grown up in Halifax, moved to Toronto for graduate school, and had never quite gotten around to leaving, which she said with the rueful humor of someone who had made peace with the decision by deciding it wasn't a decision at all. She asked about him. He told her about the contracting work, the years of commercial builds that had eventually led to the smaller, slower residential projects he preferred now. The ones where you actually knew whose walls you were working on. She listened. The way he was learning, she listened, fully, without the particular fidget of someone waiting to respond. He set it down. He hadn't opened the pocket. He was aware of it the whole time. He was aware of it the way you're aware of something unfinished. Will had given him instructions, and he was following them with more obedience than he gave most adults, which struck him as both funny and not funny at all. It was somewhere. After the food arrived, and before the waiter came back to check on them, that Claire looked at his pocket again. Not pointed about it. Just a glance that told him she'd noticed he still hadn't opened it. "You haven't looked at it yet," she said. "I was told to wait until I knew it was the right time." "Now, who told you that?" "That's my 8-year-old. She set her fork down. "And is it the right time?" Patrick looked at her. Then he reached into his pocket. The paper was folded twice. The tight, specific folds Will used when he was being deliberate about something. Patrick unfolded it on the table between them, flattening the creases carefully because it felt like the right thing to do. It was a drawing. Marker on printer paper, the way Will drew when he was using the good markers and taking it seriously. 2 figures, side by side. Round faces, arms that were slights too long, the way Will always drew arms. Both figures had what appeared to be smiles, though the smiles had a quality to them that wasn't quite certain of themselves yet. Trying, hoping, beneath the figures, in Will's largest and most careful lettering, were 2 lines. She might be nervous too. That's okay. You can both be nervous. Patrick sat with it for a moment. Was it? He was aware that his throat had done something it had no business doing in a restaurant. He pressed the edge of his thumb against the corner of the paper and breathed through it with the particular discipline of a man who had gotten good at this through necessity. "He's 8, he said, which was not a sentence, but felt like the only thing available. "That's a Fischer." Claire leaned forward slightly to see the drawing. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. "Now, how long have you 2 been on your own?" she asked. 7 years. Since he was 1. She nodded once, the kind of nod that filed information away, rather than performing a response to it. No tilted head. No soft voice. Just the nod, and then, "He's got good handwriting for 8. Patrick made a sound that was almost a laugh. Something in his chest, which had been braced since the parking lot, released approximately 1 degree. "He practices," Patrick said. "He decided this winter that handwriting matters because..." He paused. "I don't know why, actually. He just decided." "Dickers. He sounds like someone who decides things." "He really is." Set it down. He folded the drawing back along Will's original creases and set it beside his plate. The conversation found its way back in. The tentative quality of it slowly replaced by something easier. The kind of ease that comes from both people quietly agreeing not to make anything harder than it needs to be. He set it down. He learned she had a habit of walking the long way to places she could have reached faster, not out of indecision, but because she found that cities made more sense when you moved through them slowly. That she had a sister in Vancouver who called too rarely, and meant well, that she'd been set up by Jess at work with approximately the same amount of advance warning he'd gotten, which was not much. "Did Jess tell you anything about me?" he asked. "She said you were a good man, and that you needed a reason to leave the house that wasn't a hardware store." Patrick felt his mouth do something against his will. "That's accurate," he said. She said you'd say that." He set it down. The evening was moving in a way he hadn't anticipated. He had expected it to feel effortful, the conversational equivalent of lifting something heavy, and it didn't. It had its own momentum. He kept being surprised by this. It was somewhere between the coffee and the moment they both reached for the bill at the same time, and then looked at each other and negotiated it with more good humor than he'd expected, that he looked across the table at her and found himself falsitusens he'd noticing things he'd noticed at the entrance and filed away. The scarf she'd worn outside was folded on the bench beside her. Her coat was still slightly damp at the shoulder from wherever she'd been before. She had a small ink mark on the inside of her left wrist, the kind you get from a pen that leaks, that she clearly hadn't noticed. She had not arrived effortless. She had arrived carefully managed, and the composure she was carrying across this table was something she had chosen, and was choosing, same as him. That felt important. In a way he didn't entirely know how to hold yet. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You've been asking me things all evening. This one's different." He turned his coffee cup once. "When you saw the paper, you could have said nothing. It would have been an easy thing to let go. Most people would have."
That's a terror.
She looked at the table for a moment. Then she reached for her bag. From inside it, she took out her phone case, the kind with the card slot on the back. She removed something from the slot. A photograph. Small, the kind printed from a home printer, slightly faded at the edges from being carried. She set it on the table between them. It was a picture of two people. A woman in her late 30s, and beside her, a boy of about 7 or 8, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. There was a hand-lettered sign visible. Sign. In the background, something about a fundraiser. The rest cut off. The boy in the photo had a marker drawing on the back of his left hand, a star or a sun, something circular with points. "My sister," Claire said, "and her son. My nephew, the one I mentioned." She looked at the photograph. She passed away 2 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis. The restaurant was still moving around them. Someone at another table laughed. The waiter passed. None of it felt particularly relevant. "I'm sorry," Patrick said, because there wasn't anything else to say. "I know." She said it without flinching. The way someone says something they've heard enough times to know which ones are real. "When I saw the paper in your pocket, I just knew what it was. Not what it said, just the fact of it. A child trying to help an adult through something the adult isn't sure about." She paused. "My nephew does that. Since she died, he makes these little things. Notes. Drawings. He puts them in my coat pockets when I visit. I think he learned it from watching her."
That time art.
Patrick looked at the photograph. "He still does it?" he said. "Last time I visited, he put a list in my jacket. Things he thinks I should try. Number 1 was, eat more ice cream. It actually helps. Number 4 was, watch the sky at 7 p.m. because that's the best time." She picked up the photograph and held it for a moment before returning it to the card slot. "He's 9 now." He's the age where he's decided certain things are true and doesn't need you to confirm them. Ask. Patrick thought about Will at the top of the stairs, with his arms on his knees and his absolute certainty about the green shirt. That's exactly the age, he said. So when I saw what was in your pocket, she looked at him. I didn't want to pretend I hadn't. He understood that. The particular gap between being unable to fix something and being unable to do nothing. He understood it in a way that didn't need explaining. The waiter came. They both said no to dessert without discussing it, and neither of them commented on this. But Patrick noticed. The restaurant had thinned out, without him, registering it happening. The tables around them had turned over. It was later than he'd thought.
Dead.
She said it herself before he could decide whether to reach for it. Jack missed. I almost talked myself out of coming tonight.
Deficit.
He looked at her. I sat in my car in the parking garage, she said. Probably 10 minutes. I had a whole case built for why it made more sense to just go home. She looked at her coffee cup. I'm good at that. Building cases. Just what changed your mind? He was quiet for a moment. I thought about my nephew. The notes in my pockets. He does it because he wants me to know I'm not alone in things. And I thought, he went to that trouble. The least I can do is show up. Patrick sat with that.
Oh.
I was in my truck for 9 minutes, he said. Something moved through her expression. Not dramatic. The way a room changes when someone opens a window somewhere else in the house. 9 minutes, she said. In the parking lot. Engine running. She looked at him with a steadiness that had been there since the door. Not performing, not waiting for a particular reaction. Just there. We're a pair, she said. We're something. Patrick agreed. They walked out at 9:58. Seti set it down. The street was colder than when he'd arrived, the city having made its shift into the later hours. Quieter. Fewer people. Their breath appeared in small clouds and disappeared before they could become anything. They stood on the sidewalk the way you stand when an evening is ending, and neither person has worked out the exact shape of the ending yet. Patrick knew this moment during the week in the reluctant, sideways way. He'd imagined the whole evening. A handshake. A polite conclusion. The relief of returning to the known. Claire reached into her coat pocket. She took out the photograph. That she held it out to him. Patrick looked at it in her hand. That's yours, he said. I know. She kept her hand extended. I've been carrying it a long time. I carry it because I needed to remember what it looked like when someone was completely loved. She looked at the photograph for a moment, but I've been carrying it for me. And I think maybe you and your son might need to see it more than I need to keep carrying it. He took it. The photograph was lighter than it should have been, given what it was. He stood on the sidewalk holding something that had been in her pocket every day for 2 years, and felt the full weight of being trusted with it. Thank you, he said. Tonight was really good. He smiled, genuine, the kind that doesn't have any performance in it. It was, she said. He turned and walked toward the parking garage. He turned toward where he'd left his truck 3 blocks north. He walked, his footsteps on the pavement. A car turning at the intersection ahead. The ordinary sound of a city that had no interest in what had just happened. He counted without meaning to. 1, 3, 6, 8, 11. Dasser. He stopped. He was standing on the sidewalk. with the photograph in his hand, and the sound of her footsteps fading behind him, and he understood with a clarity that was almost physical what was happening. He had done this before, not with her, not with anyone specific, but with the version of this moment that had appeared in different forms the moment over 7 years. Moment, something possible showed up, and he found the reasonable way to let it go. He knew every inch of reasonable. He had lived there for 7 years. He knew how to make a safe thing out of almost anything, how to take an evening that had been more than expected and file it into something manageable before he got home. So that by the time Will asked him about it at breakfast, he'd have something pleasant and contained to say, and no reason to feel any of the things he was currently feeling. The footsteps behind him had gone quiet.
There's class.
He turned around. She was half a block away, walking, with her chin slightly down against the cold. He set it down, Claire. One word. Her name. He'd said it 3 or 4 times during dinner, in the middle of sentences where it meant nothing in particular. Now, it meant everything he hadn't said on the sidewalk and the 9 minutes in the parking lot, and 7 years of being enough without once asking if he was allowed to want more than enough. He stopped. She turned. Dempsey. He walked back. He didn't say all of it, not on a cold sidewalk at 10 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, with the city settling in around them. But he walked back, and they stood together, and he asked if he could call her. And she said yes, and he said he would, and she believed him, which was more than he'd earned given the previous 45 seconds. He drove home with the photograph on the passenger seat. Frank let himself out. When Patrick came through the door, coat already on, giving him the look that asked everything without asking anything. Patrick gave him the look that said he's explain later, and Frank put on his hat and said goodnight and left, without any of the commentary he was absolutely capable of, absolute irresim. The house was the way it always was after Will went to sleep. A specific quiet, the shape of the day still in it, a bowl that had held cereal still on the counter. 3 Lego pieces on the stairs that Patrick picked up and set on the side table. A library book open face down on the couch. Patrick turned off the kitchen light. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he sat down on the floor with his back against the wall outside Will's door. Knees up. The way he'd sat there before. The way he'd sat there before in the long early years when sleeping through the night. He'd was not a guarantee. And he'd needed to be close without being in the room. He put 2 things on the floor in front of him. Bill's drawing on the right. The 2 stick figures with their 2 long arms and their uncertain smiles. The careful instruction pressed into the paper, with a child's complete conviction. She might be nervous too. That's okay. You can both be nervous. The photograph on the left. Claire's sister and her nephew, both laughing at something outside the frame. The marker drawing on the boy's hand. The fundraiser sign cut off at the edge. 2 children. Different cities, different years, different losses. Both of them had decided that the people they loved needed to know they weren't alone, and both of them had done what they could with what they had. Patrick thought about the 9 minutes in the parking lot. This 11 steps in the wrong direction. The photograph on the passenger seat. He thought about the question he'd been carrying in the floor of his chest for longer than he'd been willing to admit. Not about Claire, not about tonight, but about himself. He sat down, whether there was still something in him that was capable of being opened, whether 7 years of building a life that was solid and solid and sufficient, and self-contained and self-contained, had used up the part of him that could still want something uncertain. He was 39 years old. He had a son who put notes in pockets because he believed that was a useful thing a person could do for someone they loved. He had spent 7 years being exactly what was needed, and it had never once occurred to him to ask whether he was allowed to need something back. Will's door was open 3 inches, the way he liked it. Patrick could hear him breathing. Slow. Even deep in whatever world 8-year-olds went to when they slept. Full of whatever logic and completeness they brought to everything else. In a few hours, Will would be up. He would want something with maple syrup. He would want to know everything. And Patrick would tell him some of it, and Will would fill in the rest with a confidence that had nothing to do with the facts and everything to do with having already decided how it went. Patrick picked up the photograph and the drawing, held one in each hand. His son had put a piece of paper in his pocket and sent him out the door with instructions that were, when he stripped everything away, very straightforward. She might be nervous too. That's okay. You can both be nervous. He hadn't needed to be certain. He just needed to turn around. He was still sitting there when he heard the small sound from behind the door, a rustle. Then, the soft, deliberate thump of feet finding the floor. Then the door swung open and Will appeared in the gap, hair sideways from the pillow, wearing the sweatshirt he'd put on at dinner and apparently not taken off, squinting against the light. He looked at Patrick sitting on the floor the way he always looked at adult behavior that was unusual but not alarming. Taking it in, deciding what to make of it. He came and sat beside him without being invited. Leaned into Patrick's arm. Patrick put the arm around him. Will looked at the 2 things on the floor. He picked up his own drawing, studied it, set it back exactly where it had been. Then he picked up the photograph, carefully, with both hands, the way he picked up things that mattered. He looked at the 2 people in it for a long moment. The woman, the boy with the marker on his hand, set the photograph down with the same care. Who's the kid? He asked. He set down her nephew. He set it down. He looks like he's good at laughing. I think he probably is. Will looked at the photograph for another moment. Then he said, in the voice that was still soft with sleep, "Is she okay?" It was such a plain question. No lead-up, no scaffolding. Just the thing itself, offered directly. The way Will asked most things that mattered to him. Set it down. Patrick looked at both things on the floor in front of him. "Yeah," he said. "I think she's going to be." Will considered this. Nodded once, the nod he gave, when something confirmed what he'd already concluded. He stayed there for a while, his weight solid and warm against Patrick's side. And then he stood up and padded back to his room without ceremony. The door swung to its 3-inch gap. Patrick sat alone in the hallway for a few more minutes. Then he got up, put the photograph and the drawing on the kitchen counter side by side, and went to bed. He called Claire the next day. They talked for 40 minutes. He called again 3 days later, and they talked longer. The first time, all 3 of them were in the same place, on a Saturday afternoon at the end of February. Patrick was more nervous than he'd been outside the restaurant. More than the 9 minutes in the parking lot, more than the 11 steps in the wrong direction. He hadn't expected that. He'd already done the hard parts. He'd turned around. He'd made the calls. And yet, standing in the lobby of the Science Center, while Will read every word of every sign near the entrance with the thoroughness of someone who had time and intended to use all of it, Patrick felt something in his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with himself. Will had dressed himself that morning in the sweater he considered his best one, and had not mentioned this or asked for any acknowledgement of it, which was its own form of information. Claire came through the doors at 12 minutes past noon, with a tote bag over one shoulder, and the slightly composed expression of someone who was working. Not to appear like they were working. She wore a red coat Patrick hadn't seen before. Her hair was different than the restaurant, more settled, though he noticed this the ways you notice something that has changed from the first time you saw it without being able to say exactly what the first version was. She and Patrick exchanged a look that contained, without any words, most of what they'd talked about over the past several weeks. Set it down, then they both looked at Will. And so Will looked at Claire. He did not look at her the way he looked at most adults, with the patience of someone waiting for the adult to finish deciding how to interact with him. He looked at her direct with him. He looked at her directly. Assessment. Genuine. Claire did not crouch down to his level. He also didn't speak first. She also didn't speak first. She stood with her tote bag and let him look. Will's eyes moved to the tote bag. There was a patch on it. A stitched bird. A heron or something like it. Wings open. He clocked this with visible attention. Then back to her face. "Hi," he said. "Hi," said Claire. That was enough, for now. They moved through the museum the way the three of them found their way through the morning. Naturally, without a plan. Will led, mostly, stopping when something held him. Claire didn't manage him, or perform interest. She didn't have attention. When he stopped in front of the weather station exhibit and read the explanation of lake effect snow with the expression of someone encountering important information, he read it too, at the same pace. No commentary, no performance of enthusiasm. Will noticed. Patrick could see him noticing. They found a quieter corner on the second floor with benches near the window. Will had accumulated a museum map, a handout about tidal patterns, and a rubber-banded roll of admission stickers he'd acquired through means Patrick didn't fully follow. He spread these on the bench beside him and reviewed them. Claire opened her tote bag. She took out a small notebook, the kind with a soft cover and unlined pages, and a mechanical pencil. Patrick hadn't known about the notebook. He watched her open it without asking, and she didn't explain. Just settled the notebook against her knee and began to draw. Light pencil. No urgency. Will lasted approximately 2 minutes before he began migrating. He did it, the way he always moved toward things he was interested in, but hadn't decided to claim interest in yet. Sideways. Gradual. With pauses that were supposed to look casual. He made his way along the bench by increments until he was close enough to see. Claire didn't look up. She didn't adjust. She just kept the pencil. Moving, slow, and unhurried, and whatever was on the page was clearly something she was thinking about, not performing for an audience. That's Will's head lowered. He had it down. On the page, a figure was taking shape, small. A boy in a sweater, drawn with a loose economy of line that somehow caught the particular way he stood when he was reading something. The sweater had a small detail at the collar that was unmistakably the sweater Will was wearing. Will went entirely still. Claire finished the figure, looked at it, made one small addition. Then, without looking up, she angled the notebook very slightly in Will's direction. Not presenting it, just making it available. "Does that look right?" she said. Asked. Will stared at the drawing. The figure on the page had his stance, his sweater. The specific way he held his hands when he was reading, slightly curled. It was him, rendered in maybe 7 minutes by someone who had been paying attention since they walked through the door. Will took the notebook. He held it with both hands. He looked at the drawing with the serious, complete attention he gave to things he considered worth looking at. Which was not everything, but was, when it applied, absolute. They sat down. Then he reached into the front pocket of his jeans. He produced, because he was Will, and therefore always had one, a black felt-tip pen. He uncapped it. He looked at the drawing. Then, with great care, he added to it. Not to his own figure, but beside it, a second figure. Taller, a red coat, a tote bag with something on it, a bird with open wings. He drew the hair. He drew the coat buttons. He worked slowly, with the focus he brought to things that mattered. When he finished, he held the notebook up at arm's length to check it. The way he assessed things he'd made. Then he handed it back to Claire. 2 figures on the page. One in pencil, one in pen. Different hands, different weights of line. Both standing in the same place, close enough that the edges of them almost touched. Patrick was looking out the window at the street below. He was looking out the window. Because he had decided, when Will picked up the pen, that he needed to look at something else for a while. Claire's voice, when it came, was quieter than usual. "Set it down. Now neither of us is just standing there," she said.
That's Maz.
Will looked at the drawing. He looked at it with the careful consideration he gave to things he hadn't decided yet. "That's the idea," he said. They stayed until the museum began winding toward closing, until through the window had gone from afternoon to early evening, and the last few families were collecting coats and children and heading for the exits. On the way out, Will walked between them, not touching either, but close, the particular close that had a shape to it, measured, near the doors, where the crowd thickened. Briefly, the space narrowed, and Will stepped to Claire's side. He didn't ask. He reached up and took her hand. The way he took things that he'd already decided were his to take. To say, she held on. That Patrick kept walking. They came out into the cold evening air, all 3 of them. The city doing its regular Saturday evening thing around them, entirely unaware. The bottom of the steps. Will looked up at Claire. Plainly, the way he looked at things he'd made up his mind about. They're sobbing. "Are you going to come back?" he said. Claire looked at him. Then, briefly at Patrick. Then, back at Will, who was waiting with the patience of someone who asks questions because they actually want the answer. "Yeah," she said. "I'd like that." Will accepted this. He nodded once. Small and definitive, the way he nodded when something landed where he expected it to. Then he saw something at the bottom of the steps. A pigeon investigating an abandoned pretzel near the base of the railing. And the moment broke open into something else entirely, and he went to investigate. Because some things required immediate attention, and this was one of them. That at Claire. Patrick and Claire stood at the top of the steps and watched him go. He thought about a piece of paper in a jacket pocket. About two people with 9 minutes and 10 minutes of doubt between them. About a photograph that had lived in someone's wallet for 2 years and was now on his kitchen counter, next to a drawing of two stick figures with uncertain smiles. He thought about what it had taken to turn around on that sidewalk. Not certainty, not confidence, just the decision to stop walking in the wrong direction. Will had reached the pigeon. He crouched down to look at it, hands on his knees, absolutely serious about this. He turned to look back at them both. "Come on," he called. Access toward him. Claire was already moving down the steps toward him. I keep thinking about the 9 minutes. Patrick sat in that parking lot with the engine running. Not because it's unusual, because it's so ordinary it hurts. Most of us know that feeling. The car running, the door you haven't opened yet, the perfectly reasonable case you're building in your head for why tonight isn't the right night, why you're not ready, why it would be easier to just go home. Patrick knew all of it. He'd had 7 years to get good at that particular argument. What gets me is that the thing that finally moved him wasn't courage in the way we usually imagine it. It wasn't some sudden surge of confidence or a decision that everything would be fine. It was something quieter than that. It was his 8-year-old son, putting a piece of paper in his pocket and trusting that his dad would know what to do with it. Will didn't give Patrick certainty. He gave him permission to show up uncertain. She might be nervous too. That's okay. You can both be nervous. That's not a pep talk. That's wisdom. The kind most adults spend decades trying to learn and an 8-year-old somehow already carries. I think about what it takes to raise a kid who thinks like that. Patrick didn't do it by being perfect. He did it by showing up every single day for 7 years, doing the braiding and the shoe finding and the pencil sharpening, being present even when the life he was living was quieter than he wanted it to be. That kind of consistency, that fundamental decency toward the small, daily things. It doesn't go unnoticed. Children are watching all the time. Will saw his father choose kindness as a practice, not a performance. And he internalized it so completely that by 8 years old he was the one handing it back. That's cause and effect in the most human sense, not punishment and reward, not fate. Just the plain truth that how we live shapes who we become, and who we become shapes the people standing closest to us. And then there's Claire. She almost didn't walk through that door either. 15 minutes in a parking garage. A whole case built for going home. What changed it was a photograph in a wallet. Her sister, her nephew, the reminder that someone had once decided she was worth showing up for. She carried that with her for 2 years, not because she was stuck in grief, but because she was smart enough to know that some things are worth keeping close. That kind of clear-eyed understanding, knowing what you need and being honest enough to admit it. That's its own form of strength. What I love most about this story is the moment Patrick takes 11 steps in the wrong direction and stops. Not because someone grabbed his arm, not because a sign appeared, because he was honest enough with himself to recognize what he was doing. That kind of self-awareness is hard. It means you have to look at your own habits without excusing them. He'd spent 7 years being reliable and sufficient, and he had never once asked whether reliable and sufficient was the whole story. 11 steps. Then he turned around. I see tears. Set it down. You don't have to be certain. You just have to stop walking away from the things that matter. Will figured that out at 8. Patrick got there at 39. Claire found her way back to it through a photograph she'd been carrying since the worst year of her life. The timeline doesn't matter. What matters is the turning around.